But our next speaker, Josh Bednar. Josh Bednar is a wildlife ecologist with the Natural Resources Research Institute with a primary focus on birds. Specifically, he is interested in identifying and developing conservation solutions for species in greatest conservation need. His other areas of interest include breeding ecology, habitat associations, migration, land use, climate change, and agriculture. Josh.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Good? Okay, great. So I'm Josh Bednar. I work at the Natural Resources Research Institute as a avian ecologist there. This presentation today is going to talk about 30 years of breeding bird monitoring efforts in the Chippewa and Superior National Forests. And I've been fortunate to study or conduct point counts on 12 of those, for 12 of those years. So this is our lab. There's 7 full-time staff members within what we call the bird lab there, headed by Dr. Alexis Grindy. Most days are great and wonderful. It's good to be out in the field, but as you can see in a photo or two here, we do have days that are not so fun. But generally we have a good time when we're out there, and it's for the birds. So just to touch base on Minnesota. So Minnesota is a great place to be. It's a great place to conduct research. We've got 3 major biomes meeting here in the state. And so we've got some of the richest breeding bird diversity here in all of North America. And so what a better place to study these birds than here in Minnesota. As you know, it's getting warmer. It's just going to keep getting warmer. I think last winter we essentially had no snow for most of the winter. And is that a sign of things to come? Who knows? But things are getting warmer and things are changing, and they're going to change for our birds as well. And so with those changes, with the warming climate, we have these little buggers, pun intended, these little forest pests. One of them on the left there is the emerald ash borer. And if you're not familiar, that's an invasive beetle that's decimated black ash in the southern part of our state. And it's on its way northward. It was just documented in the Chippewa National Forest here in the last year or two. And it's going to continue to decimate our black ash in the northern part of the state. On the other hand, eastern larch beetle, which is an invasive pest in our tamarack forests, has impacted about 80% of our 1 million acres of tamarack. And basically for the last 20 or 25 years with eastern larch beetle, we just haven't had those cold enough winters to kind of knock it back or kill it off. Eastern larch beetle, it's a native beetle. It's been around here for the last couple hundred years, but the last 20 or 25 years it's done a lot of damage to our tamarack forests. And as you know, a few others have mentioned a paper that came out here about 5 years ago that have talked about the birds that have been lost here in North America over the last 40, 50 years or so. It's been estimated that forest bird populations have declined by about 1.2 billion birds. So we need to pay attention and monitor our forest birds. So in the early 1990s, Jerry Nemi and Joanne Hanowski started this Minnesota National Forest breeding bird monitoring program with the goals to gather high quality data to track population trends, assess trends and identify potential concerns, define habitat and landscape associations so we can inform forest management and our land managers. And it's very complementary. This program is very complementary to like the breeding bird survey. And so when I talk about the breeding bird survey today, I'm going to reference results from BCR Region 12, which is an area in southern Ontario, northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So the goals are to keep common species common and then focus on species of conservation interest. So this is where we conduct our surveys. The yellow points are the Superior National Forest, and the red points would be the Chippewa National Forest. We survey about 50 or more so points in the Superior versus the Chippewa. So when they set this up, they plotted 3 points in a forest stand, and generally we survey around 350 total forest stands a year between the 2 national forests. In 2024, we did a total of 1,025 point counts. Standard 10-minute surveys are what we use. Try to be out there about a half hour before sunrise to 4 hours after sunrise. Good weather conditions. 9% of our observations we detect with our ears. That map in the middle there, that gives you an idea of what one of our technicians would, oops, there we go. Thought there was something. The map in the middle there, that gives you an idea of what one of our technicians would do in a morning's worth survey. So 10 to 15 surveys per morning. And on the very right there, that's an example of what one of our data sheets looks like. With our observers, everybody has to pass a hearing test and have to pass a birdsong exam as well. While they're conducting the surveys, they're doing the best to predict where that individual bird is from the observer, give it a distance estimate, identify it down to species as best as possible, and then note which minute during that 10-minute survey that it's vocalizing. So most of what I'm going to present on this slide is true. I might be stretching the truth on a few things here. But each year, we hire about 4 to 6 people to work on this project. Just a show of hands, has anybody, we've had 118 people work on this project. Has anybody in the crowd surveyed for this project? Okay, a couple people. Okay, so each year we hire 4 to 6 technicians. We survey over 1,000 point counts in over 350 stands. They stayed in about 23 hotels, drove over 10,000 miles, had 2.3 million mosquito bites, lost 18 liters of blood, identified 17,000 individuals of about 90 or so species. So a lot of blood, sweat, and tears goes into getting this nice graph here on the right. And so what this is a trend analysis over the last 30 years or so. And we get this for about 60 or 70 species between both national forests. So very cool product. I'm not going to go through the full results of what we, from our report, but we do have a link there that you can check out that details our survey methodology, the results, kind of a cool story map that we put together. This is the average number of birds that we've detected on our surveys since 1995 onward. In the early 2000s, we saw a peak up, kind of dip down a few years later, and now the last couple years between both national forests, we've gotten a few more birds on our surveys. So that's good to see it trending back up. So between this Chippewa and Superior National Forest, roughly 2/3 of the species that we're testing have stable or increasing trends. About 1/3 of them in both national forests have declining trends, which is not great, but we're working on trying to figure out what's going on with some of those guys that are declining. So some good news, this table here shows the species that have been increasing within the Superior and Chippewa National Forest, along with their migration strategies, their nest strategies, and their vegetation types. That second column, that BBS column, is at BCR Region 12, and that's their trend for that region there. And some general agreements with what the BBS is seeing and what we're seeing with our trends, which is great. And so some concerning patterns, these are species that are declining in both national forests. A couple common denominators with this list of species is there's a lot of short distant migrants. I think Todd mentioned earlier that his little blip on short distant migrants declining. We're seeing those decline, and then a lot of our conifer or lowland conifer associates declining as well. But the positive thing for our program this past year in 2024 is that we saw no newly declining species, which is a win because the last 5 years we always see 2 or 3 species pop into the analysis in terms of them declining. This year was the first year in a few years that we haven't saw that, so that's great. And we do get signals, so birds are indicators of what's happening on the ground. The bigger graph there on the left is Tennessee warbler. Can anybody tell me or have an idea what's going on with Tennessee warbler right there, why it's doing so well in the Superior? Spruce budworm, yep. So all of our spruce budworm specialists, their graphs look like this here. The last 5-10 years, they've just been doing phenomenal. Interestingly enough, the magnolia warbler, which is our spruce fir specialist, about that same time period has started to dip downwards. So birds are great indicators of what's going on the ground. And then, so a couple guilds that we're concerned about are early successional species. We see regionally declining trends for chestnut-sided warbler, mourning warbler, song sparrow, and white-throated sparrow. That BBS trend is in parentheses there. not overly concerned with this, and the reason for that is that our national forests are our best case scenario in terms of not harvesting our forests. So we know as soon as we move out of our national forest on state land, county land, we got UPM land right there in Grand Rapids, that there's likely a ton of early successional habitat for that group of species there. We're keeping an eye on them, but we're not overly concerned at this point. And then for our aerial insectivores, we've got 4 flycatchers that are declining, that have declining trends in at least one national forest, and those were kind of a little more, we're paying a little more attention to that group of species. So the good, I'm going to talk about over the last 30 years, there's a couple species that have been doing great. Black-throated blue warblers, Canada warblers have been doing phenomenal in the Superior, as well for Canada's in the Chippewa National Forest as well, likely due to some of the management that's been going on there. We're rethinking our forestry practices. We're doing more group selection cuts, things like that are going to benefit Canada warblers. Northern water thrush are doing really well. When you think of emerald or black ash and tamarack outside of the national forest that have been impacted, it's not known whether those birds have left those areas and come into the national forest, but they're a species that's doing really well, along with golden-winged warblers, veery, wood thrush, and of course our spruce budworm specialists. For species or cover types that could be better, we have some concern. Connecticut warblers, this is a species that is by far the most in trouble in either of our national forests. They surveyed 1,025 point counts this past year. 173 of those point counts historically have had a Connecticut warbler at them at least 1 year. This year we had 0. Last year we had 0. We've documented over a 90% population decline in that species. And as Kara mentioned, we've got these alternative harvests for that species that we're hoping will help keep that species around. In addition to Connecticut warblers, some of more of our lowland conifer associates aren't doing great, olive-side flycatchers, winter wrens. Our woodpecker species are on this list. Right now I would say they're okay, but the second half of the survey, the last 15 years, most of them have started to nosedive. So we're kind of sounding the alarm here. In terms of the lowland conifer species, that alarm was being sounded about 10 years ago, and we're starting to sound that alarm with some of our woodpeckers. Interestingly enough, we do have a pileated woodpecker project starting up here this next year or two, so we'll be interested to see what that can yield in terms of insight into some of our woodpecker species. Again, our lowland conifer associates are just getting hammered. The tamarack issue, you got 1 million acres and 800,000 of that or so is impacted by larch beetle, is an issue. Additionally, when you think about black spruce and us harvesting black spruce and clear cutting, it might take those stands 50 to 100 to 150 years to get back to where they should be. So maybe it's that accumulation of harvest that's going on that might be impacting some of our lowland conifer species. And then from the conifer side, the conifer associates, when you think about what spruce budworm is doing in the Superior National Forest, that's likely impacting those as well. Short distant migrants are getting hammered. It's interesting that short distant migrants tend to prefer or like that conifer component. So there's likely a relationship there that's going on between our short distant migrants and conifer associates. And then finally our wet forests, tamarac's getting decimated, black ash is going to get decimated the next 10 to 15 years. And so we're concerned about the species using those cover types. This is coined by my boss, and I really like it because it's this facts, acts, and packs model, right? So as scientists, we're really good about coming up with these facts, getting the story, but there's kind of a lag in that action portion of it. And our group, specifically the last 3 or 4 years, has been trying to be a lot better about pushing this action side of things and helping our partners. Instead of that going sitting on a publication on a shelf somewhere, we're getting together with our partners and trying to push what we know about these species and help conserve some of these species. But the next couple slides I'm going to talk about, we've got this massive data set and kind of what are we doing to help birds. So we try to get publications out when we can. Recently, some colleagues of mine put out this range shift paper here in the last couple months. But we're trying to put more and more science out so our collaborators and partners can use this data to help conserve some of these species. Forested peatlands is a hot topic for us. It's something that we've been actually in 2008, Jerry Nemi kind of sounded the alarm with our forested peatlands. The Superior National Forest went and added a bunch of points in our black spruce and tamarack, in their black spruce and tamarack forest to better monitor these birds. Over that time period, there's been a number of grad students that have focused on things like Connecticut warblers and black spruce and tamarack. But the last 5 years, we've kind of assembled a team, I would say a team to kind of better study black spruce and tamarack forests. This team consists of forestry folks, hydrology folks, wildlife folks, and then our partners at the DNR. Charlie Tucker, Gretchen Mem, and Mike North have been instrumental in helping get these experimental harvests pushed along. Because there's over 6 million acres, or 17% of Minnesota's forest lands are forested peatlands. Peatlands cover just 3% of the world's surface, yet hold 30% of the world's carbon. So they have a ton of value. Traditionally, what we've done with black spruce is come in and clear cut it. From an economical standpoint, that's been what's best for business. 5 or 10 years ago, we said, we can't keep doing this. So the last couple of years, as Kara mentioned, we come up with this experimental study because when you can go 50 to 100 years of not having that proper habitat at that site, and you start accumulating that up over all these forest harvests, it's not great. So our thought was, what the heck, if we can have at least one tree left on the site, be better than none. But hey, what if we try to retain 10, 20, or 30% of these trees? We can still get our harvesting done, but yet we're still going to provide habitat for this wildlife. So this is something that we're trying to do to help, things like the boreal chickadee, Connecticut warbler. And initially, in addition to the birds, this is more of a forest health issue. When I was doing my master's work, I was looking at some of the black spruce sites that had initially converted over to cattails and swamped out. And I thought, this can't be great. This shouldn't be the way that we're doing our forestry practices. And just some other things we talked about, just try not to clear cut. Think about how you're fragmenting the landscape. Are there ways in your management plans that you cannot fragment areas, especially, that big bog in that Big Falls, Red Lake area up there? It's such a precious area, and how are there ways that we can, try to fragment it less if we have to do a forest harvest? We're not advocating for going out and cutting black spruce and doing these experiments. We're just saying if you have to, here's another tool in your toolbox. And then finally, some more work that we've worked on. Golden-winged warblers, they're one of the most critically threatened birds in North America. Global populations were estimated at 400,000 individuals. 50% of them breed in Minnesota. So golden-winged warblers are the poster child for cutting forests, for early successional forests. They benefit from early successional forests. But one of the things we want to do is look at female use and juvenile use in these early successional forests. And the one thing that we found is that clear cuts aren't really ideal for golden-winged warblers. When you can have tree retention at these sites, so retaining 10, 20, 30 trees per acre, that's going to benefit this species. In addition to that, one other thing we found is that, and this isn't new, that they also use shrubby wetlands. So now that we know that they will, often use shrubby wetlands to nest in, we don't have to have another excuse to go out and cut our forests. And so that's been great. A couple videos here I'll show you before I wrap up. Life is tough being a young bird. We had really high predation rates. So we have this long-term data set, and we're investigating species like golden-winged warblers, Connecticut warblers, and trying to come up with conservation solutions for them. How can you be involved? There's a lot of ways that you can be involved. Most of you already are involved in them, but the DNR each year puts out stand exam lists. You have the ability to comment on those lists or provide feedback. Maybe it's a mature black spruce stand, one of your favorite stands that might be up for harvest. You can comment on that. Pollinator-friendly yards and landscape, lights out programs, just in general supporting the environment are things that you can do to be involved in terms of helping birds. So in summary, these species are indicators of what's happening on the ground. We see that with our spruce budworm specialists. Minnesota is very unique, where things are either at the northern edge of their range or southern edge of their range. But the reality is if we don't have that quality habitat on the ground for them, this is the only time in that bird's life cycle for that year that we can add more birds to that population. These things are very complex, very nuanced. I wish I had the silver bullet for every single species, but there are migratory issues going on with some of these species. There are wintering issues going on. When we look at Brazil and Argentina and how those areas are being deforested, it's likely impacting some of our species as well. But we know we have issues here, right? Because some of our permanent residents are declining as well. But most species in general appear to be doing okay, and we have an eye on those ones that are trending downwards or not doing great. But this monitoring project has been foundational for guiding our lab and help conserve our state's forest birds. With that, I'll take any questions.
All right, let's take a couple of questions before the break here. Anybody? Anybody with questions? There you go. Okay.
For the change in pests, spruce budworm, there's a few others. Are there any correlations, or how should I think about changes we should expect to those pests if there was changes in forest management, say to go to strip cutting instead of clear cutting?
Yeah, so that's a good question. One of the things that was brought up here 5 or 7 years ago when I was starting to have conversations with the DNR was, with tamarack, we've come in and we've clear cut it, right? Well, larch beetle will only kill trees down to a certain diameter. And so my argument was if we would have had a little diversity within those stands there, a lot of our stands would likely still be impacted, but just having that diversity there that within stand diversity would have really helped these stands. I don't know if that kind of helps or.
I have a technical question, Allison Jensen. I've tried to look at your story map, the GIS story map, and it said I had to sign in. I am a U of M retiree, so I'm blocked out. Can you open it to the public, please?
Yeah, it should. If it's not, we will. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Josh.